Number 10. Karakoto. Nicknamed the Black City, Karakoto is an ancient walled city in the Gobi Desert of Inner Mongolia. This incredible historic site was once ruled by the infamous Genghis Khan. Dating back to 1032, it was built along the Silk Road and was a flourishing trade center and cultural hub under the Western Xia Empire. During the 13th century, Mongol ruler Genghis Khan began a series of military campaigns to take Western Xia territory. He took Karakoto in 1226. The city adopted the name Etzina and continued to thrive under Genghis Khan's rule. In 1372, soldiers for China's Ming dynasty approached the city and surrounded the Mongol king Karabator. They diverted the Black River, Karakoto's only water source, cutting its plants and population off from much-needed hydration. Then they waited. Weakened by deadly thirst, Karabator's soldiers didn't stand a chance against the invading Ming warriors, who ruthlessly slaughtered everyone within the city's walls. Karakoto was ultimately abandoned and fell into ruins. Protected from looters because of its remote location, the site was rediscovered in the early 20th century. Thousands of texts in the ancient Tangut language and paintings were found. The 5 pagodas and nearly 33-foot-high walls that surrounded the city are still standing, along with several other crumbling buildings. Number 9. Train Cemetery. On the outskirts of an abandoned transportation hub near the mesmerizing salt flats of Uyuni in Bolivia, there is a collection of rusting locomotives and rotting train cars. Known as the Cementerio de Trenes, or the Great Train Graveyard, the site is the product of a 19th century plan to expand the Uyuni region's train network. The project never came to fruition, as you can see. As the local mining industry began to dry up, developers ran into negotiation conflicts with other countries and experienced increasingly complicated technical problems. The plans ground to a screeching halt, leaving more than 100 trains parked in the middle of the desert. Most of the vehicles were imported from Britain during the early 20th century. They are heavily rusted from the region's salty winds, and they've also been vandalized. The property is open to visitors, many of whom stop by during a trip to the salt flats. A seemingly random train graveyard in the remote, scorching hot climate is strange enough. To make things even weirder, there are several hotels in the region that are made almost entirely out of salt, making a visit to Uyuni anything but ordinary. Number 8. An Immortal Plant. The Namib Desert in southern Africa is one of the world's oldest and driest deserts. It's also home to one of the world's longest living plants, known as Welwitschia. This strange species has just 2 leaves, which can grow for thousands of years. The oldest Welwitschia plants are thought to date back at least 3,000 years to the beginning of the Iron Age, according to the New York Times. A recent study examined the species' genome in an attempt to figure out how and why it lives so long. Researchers found that around 86 million years ago, Welwitschia's genome doubled due to a mistake during the cell division process. At the time, the region was experiencing an especially dry period. Extreme conditions like this are often associated with genome duplication, according to lead study author Tao Wan. Co-author Andrew Leach says this resulted in a lot of junk DNA called retrotransposons. Even worse, the expanded genome demanded a lot of extra energy from the plant just to stay alive. Between 1 and 2 million years ago, Welwitschia responded to increasingly harsh conditions by silencing its retrotransposons through a process called methylation. This decreased the amount of energy the plant needed to survive, even with its huge genome. As plant biologist Jim Liebensmack pointed out to the New York Times, the bizarre plant's genetic resilience could possibly provide useful information for improving agriculture, particularly as global temperatures increase. Immortal plant life in the harshest environments? The capabilities of DNA are pretty fascinating. Number 7. A lost Libyan civilization. In 2011, scientists revealed the discovery of over 100 ancient fortresses in the Sahara Desert in southwestern Libya. Dating back between 1 and 500 AD, these settlements were inhabited by a mysterious but advanced civilization called the Garamantes. Researchers identified the sites by examining satellite photographs and aerial images dating back to the 1950s and 60s. In 2011, a team of experts traveled to the fortresses, which are located 620 miles south of the Libyan capital of Tripoli. There, they found pottery samples, confirming that the Garamantes once occupied the site. The archaeologists noticed that their buildings were remarkably preserved, but they didn't get a chance to explore as in-depth as they wanted to. Unfortunately, the Libyan civil war cut the expedition short. At first glance, the ruins have a Romanesque feel, but they are not Roman at all, as the architecture belonged to a powerful African kingdom. The ruins were extremely tightly packed, with as many as 10 village-sized settlements being crammed into a 1.5 square mile area, almost like a modern city. Scientific knowledge of the Garamantes is limited. Violence and civil unrest in Libya has prevented thorough research from taking place, and the country has a limited budget for investing in archaeology. Going on what little they have to learn from, experts have determined that the Garamantes had their own writing system. They also made high-quality textiles and were metalworkers. Their most impressive achievement, however, was their advanced irrigation system, which enabled the society to grow plants, even in the middle of the desert. Number 6. Aralcum Desert Ship Graveyard. Before the 1960s, the Aral Sea was the world's 4th largest inland sea. Once home to a thriving fishing industry, it straddled the border between modern-day Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan. That all changed when the Soviet Union diverted the 2 main rivers feeding the sea to supply farms with water. The once vast body of water began to rapidly dry up, leaving behind a salty, poisonous wasteland in its wake. As the sea shrunk, its salt content reached toxic levels and killed off its marine life. With no more money to be made from fishing, people began to hightail it out of town for better prospects elsewhere. Most of what was once the Aral Sea is now the Aralcum Desert, and it's littered with dozens of rusting fishing boats that former residents abandoned. The decaying ships represent the distant memory of a place that once had a thriving economy, before it was replaced by the desolate and eerie scenery that gives the feeling of some kind of post-apocalyptic movie set. Most of the ghost ships sit at the edge of former harbor cities and seaside towns, near clusters of derelict buildings. The few people who still live in the area are plagued by health problems from the toxic dust that blows around. But in a surprising turn of events, the Aral Sea is once again being fed by the rivers that were diverted away from it. Its salt content has decreased, and fish have returned. For now, it's uncertain whether the sea will be restored to its former glory and perhaps replace the depressing sight of rotting ships. Number 5. Film City. If you drive several hours from Qatar's capital city of Doha into the Qatari desert, you might stumble upon a deserted, ancient-looking Bedouin-style village filled with minarets, a mosque, and mud brick houses with wooden doors. The exact explanation behind its presence is somewhat of a mystery, depending on who you ask. Known as Film City, this site is thought to be an abandoned film set that was built for a TV series or a movie. It was once a fishing village, but was apparently abandoned during the 1970s. In 2009, the village was partially rebuilt, presumably for filming purposes, although the stories vary and nobody seems to know what to believe. The deserted nature of Film City is eerie enough on its own, but it gets even creepier when you think about the vast, seemingly limitless desert that surrounds it. Visitors are unlikely to see a car drive by or cross paths with another human, except for the security guard who oversees the property, and getting there requires a 4-wheel drive vehicle. And now for number 4, but first want to give a big shout out to Britannia Renee and Ashley O. Thanks so much for supporting this channel. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe for more videos about amazing and mysterious discoveries. Number 4. Old Skagen Church. Sometime between 1355 and 1387, a Gothic-style church dedicated to St. Lawrence of Rome was built just outside of Skagen, Denmark. Known as the Old Skagen Church, it belonged to the Danish crown until 1459, and it is one of the area's oldest buildings. Over the centuries, the region underwent a process called desertification, which is kind of what it sounds like. Sand swept in from the nearby Rabjerg Mile Dune and began accumulating around the brick church. By the late 18th century, the building's entrance became buried regularly. Whenever they wanted to attend a service, worshippers had to dig their way in through the sand. Eventually, the problem became too much to deal with. The church's contents were removed to protect them from damage, and in 1795, Denmark's king allowed the church to close. Most of the structure is either destroyed or buried. All that can be seen today is the main tower, which sticks up out of the sand. The National Museum of Denmark owns the site and maintains the tower as a navigational landmark. Very limited excavations have been carried out on the rest of the building. Local authorities believe that the floor and altar are still there, swallowed by sand, but they haven't investigated to confirm their suspicions. Number 3. Huge prehistoric cemetery. While hunting for dinosaur remains at a site called Gobero in Niger in 2000, a group of scientists stumbled upon a large human graveyard dating as far back as 10,000 years. It's the biggest known cemetery ever found in the Sahara. In addition to around 200 human graves, the remains of fish, crocodiles, and other animals were buried there. Evidence indicates that this site was occupied during 2 different periods separated by a 1,000-year gap. The groups that lived there, the Kiphians and Tenarians, left behind an array of grave goods in addition to the remains buried at the cemetery. Researchers have learned a lot about what day-to-day life was like for people from these groups based on the artifacts, which include bone jewelry, arrowheads, and harpoons. There were numerous bizarre burials, including a man whose head was placed in a pot, and another who was laid to rest on top of a turtle shell, as well as a woman who was buried facing 2 children. The women and 2 children were likely buried on top of a bed of flowers, as evidenced by pollen found in their graves. Even more strangely, the tools and animals at Gobero seemed out of place for the modern Sahara climate. This is because they originate from a time known as the period of the Green Sahara, also known as an African humid period, during which changes in the Earth's orbit brought more rain to the region, resulting in an uptick in vegetation, water, and the life forms that come with it. Pretty amazing what can be learned from burial sites, even details about dramatic shifts in climate over time. Number 2. An abandoned prison. In 1952, the U.S. government built the Boron Air Force Station in the Mojave Desert. Located in Kern County, California, the site remained in operation until 1975, when it was decommissioned. 4 years later, the abandoned collection of buildings was turned into a federal prison. Boron Federal Prison could accommodate up to 540 prisoners and had 25 units for staff members. There were several industrial buildings at the site where inmates assembled military vehicles and repaired forklifts for the U.S. Army. Like many low-security prisons, Boron had barrack-style housing instead of actual cells. But the facility was unique because it had almost no security, even compared to other minimum security prisons. It wasn't surrounded by a fence, there were no guard towers, and the doors didn't lock. But why? The property was so remote, the prisoners generally weren't dangerous to the general public, although there were a few instances where inmates escaped. Boron closed in 2000 amid budget cuts, and the building that housed the inmates was demolished in 2018. Several decrepit buildings are left standing at the site, which is still owned by the Federal Bureau of Prisons. They're in a noticeable state of disrepair and are not exactly safe to explore, so trespassing is strictly prohibited. Number 1. Lake Dolores Water Park. During the 1950s, a California businessman named Bob Myers built a private water park for his extended family off Interstate 15 in Newberry Springs. It first opened its doors in 1962 and eventually evolved into a 250-acre recreational facility that was made open to the public. The property went by several different names over the years, including Discovery Water Park, Rockahoopla Water Park, and Lake Dolores Water Park. These names reflect buyers and other owners' numerous attempts to rebrand and reopen the site, and bad luck seemed to plague the business. Each time someone tried to clean up the water park's image in hopes of drawing a resurgence of visitors, it seems like something got in the way. Byers held onto the business until 1990, when he sold it to an investment group who upgraded the equipment and reimagined the park with a 1950s theme. But their luck wasn't any better than his. After operating for just 3 seasons and accumulating copious amounts of debt, the park closed yet again. One more buyer tried and failed to turn the site into a success, and the property has been closed since 2004. The weathered, graffiti-covered equipment and buildings left behind are not only an eyesore, they are also said to be dangerous. There are rumors that the park will reopen yet again, but this hasn't happened. As of September, the property was listed on the market for $11 million. If you happen to be in the market for an abandoned, bad luck plagued desert water park. Thanks for watching! Do you like to visit the desert? Let me know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos like these. See you soon! Bye!